All right, everybody, we'll get started today. Again, my name is Jeff Cheel with Chili Publish. I am a pre-sales manager and a support trainer based in the United States. We're going to be doing a session tonight and talking about an introduction to integrating Chili Publisher. We've done a series of presentations this month on general introduction, our thoughts on packaging, and now tonight we're going to talk about ways in order to take Chili from a concept and integrate it into your system. And we'll be going through a little bit of the API tonight, talking a little bit about the framework, about the way that Chili works, the way that it does fit in with kind of any application that's out there in the market. Me personally, I am a trainer. I do some training on the API. I am not a developer of the software, so if I do have any questions from you guys, I'll do my best to answer them. And if you do have those questions, please do post them on the chat in GoToMeeting, and I'll be able to answer them as we go. So feel free to answer them as we go along. I will have some time at the end too to answer questions, just in case. And for those out there, we are recording the session, so if you need that session after we're done, I can definitely pass it to you. So really quick, what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to be talking about who is Chili Publisher, what is the product, Chili Publish. We're going to look at a little bit at the Spicy Beer Company to understand a little bit about integration, talk about where it might fit into your website, talks about some general API integration points, look at our general integration project, understand what resources we have available, and then have some Q&A at the end. So who is Chili Publish? We are a company based out of Brussels. We have an office in New York. We're definitely expanding into Singapore. So international company with a focus on software development. I'm actually looking at the core of the company. We actually built our API before we built our software. Our crew wanted to develop a product that was very easily implementable. Wanted to have something that can be spoken to, can be worked with by other applications, and definitely fit. We've seen other applications out in the market where they don't like to expose their product. They like to take you into their system and work with you. We built a product that's very much dependent on our development partners. Very much dependent on the storefronts that we build into, the workflow solutions that we build into, et cetera. So a core competency of our product is to make sure that all the aspects of the editor are exposed and can be manipulated and implemented and worked on by your solution. Company is about 25 employees now. We're a little over 20. Most of those are developers and R&D. We're constantly working on feature requests. We're constantly working on improving the product. So not a lot of sales getting in the way of making sure that we're really putting out the best product that we can. And company's been growing year over year since 2010 when we kind of started up. And every year we've tried to make big leaps and bounds towards HTML5 implementation, towards new features, towards bigger aspects of the company to try to see where we can take it. Now, what is the product Chili Publish? Well, Chili Publish is a powerful and flexible online document editor. It's the main product that we sell. It is an online document editor that is embedded into your production workflow. And that production workflow could be an e-commerce storefront. It could be a production tool or a workflow tool that you have inside of your system. It's an editor that can be implemented and used inside of your system. So no need for an end user to download an application or an app. It's embedded, and we do this by putting our product inside an iframe. And I'll show you an example of it here in a few minutes. Now, once that product is up and running, this is more for the design side, but it can be catered to its user. So we can make it simple for the basic user. We can make it complicated for the more complex user. We can definitely cater that and do that with the tools that we have when you launch the editor, the resources that your template builders would develop as you started to work on your implementation. Now, if we look at kind of an overflow or an overview of where things fit and where Chili kind of fits into this grand scheme of things, you'll see we fit kind of right in the middle of that production flow. We don't replace your user login for your website. We don't replace your shopping cart. We don't replace your general product overview or your rules or your governance of which products are seen by which user. You still control all of that. But when a user finds that product, you would use Chili on that customization page. You would host an iframe on that page. Inside that iframe, you'd use the API to make a call to your Chili server. You would then pull that iframe, that URL that you generate from the API, put it into your iframe, and then that launches the editor. If there's any questions about general architecture, by the way, we're not a SaaS product. We don't host software. We're not a software for service product. We install our software on your server. You would essentially put your Chili server right next to what other application you might be running. Now, a little bit as we go and talking about some of the features of Chili. Client side, from what the client sees and what you're going to deliver to the client, is our editor. And that's either going to be an HTML5 or Flash. And right now, you can deliver one template in either version by simply making one API call or another. Now, it's one template that your designer builds, but you can deliver it in either way. And then on the back end, back from underneath that editor on the server, it's going to be two components. It's going to be the Chili engine, which is the piece that generates all your image previews, generates all your PDFs, all your different file types, and the back office, which is going to be the tool that your designers use in order to manage and organize their template. So really, for the most part today, we're really going to be focusing on that Chili engine and understanding what the Chili engine does, what you can do by modifying the back office. We are going to be speaking in the API sense about what you can do with the editor too, but we're going to touch on the different ways that the API can interact with really these core elements that are on the screen here. And overall, from a product standpoint, the back office, again, is the tool that your designers will use. The editor is the tool that's client-facing. The API is going to be the language that brings everything together. The Chili engine is going to be the tool that generates your PDFs, generates your files, etc. And then that plugin is another part of the kind of the product suite that we see here that is going to be your designer's tool in order to implement templates, in order to bring those templates from the design suite, the Adobe suite into Chili. So it's all that design tool. But again, we're really going to be talking about that API and the Chili engine. Now, what is Chili? Chili is a publishing and editing tool, just like we just talked about. It's great for editing documents, adding document intelligence, publishing to different formats. But what it is not, it's not a web-to-print portal. It's not a workflow management tool. So in a lot of ways, if you're looking at Chili and you love the Chili software, you still have to have something that drives it. It needs to be integrated into your solution. And with that, that's why we built this product on top of the API. That's why we put that forward facing. So as you're looking at Chili, definitely keep this in mind, whether you're going to build it into your DAM, your e-commerce, your production flow, your custom website, whatever that might be. Now, let's take a look a little bit at our spicy beer company, look at a product, launch the editor a little bit so we can start kind of giving some perspective. And we have built this spicy beer company site as a demo portal for anybody to look into as an example. So if you're looking for access to this to check out the way that we've done the implementation, not only do we give you access to the site, we show you how we built it. You could definitely use a lot of the code that we put together in order to help start your implementation process. Now, this is a generic website. It can be used for anything. It could be in the mind of an e-commerce solution or a production workflow, whatever kind of suits your fancy, but it has some of the same rules. Again, this is not Chili yet. This is just a generic website, but it does allow for a user to find a product that they'd like to customize, give different tabs to find that product and to see it. Now, while this is not Chili, this site is still using some of the API. It's actually still using an API call to make the thumbnails of the images that you see here. It's still using an API call to get the product list that you see here on the page. So there are a few tools that are being utilized in order to create the elements that you see up on the page right now. So that API does have some outer purpose and some use aside from just generating an editor to put into an iframe. Now, when I find the product, like the product that we see here, and I make a click, this is when we're going to make a call through the API in order to draw that product to myself. Now, on this page, the back button and the green bar at the top of the page are still part of my website, but everything below is an iframe. And inside that iframe, I'm going to make a call to the server, ask it for a URL. That URL is going to be delivered inside that iframe, and now I'm going to be able to see that product. So technically what happened was the API call was made on a particular template on my system. Now, I actually made an additional call to make a copy of a master template. That new template has actually been given an order ID that you see here at the top of the page. And now that particular document is delivered to my user. Now, when I made that call and I asked for that URL, I not only asked for the document, I asked for a few other elements like the workspace that we see here, the view preferences, I ask for a certain user so that they have certain rights. This is an end user, so we're seeing this as an end user, etc. So all those factors are going into that API call when we ask our server for an editor. Now that the editor's on screen, we see it and we can manipulate it. Now, from a server standpoint and from a processing standpoint, all the editing is done on the client side. All the processing is actually being done in the client's browser in real time. I'm not making calls back and forth to the server. I'm not asking the server for a new proof every time I make a change to a value. All this is being done on the client side. And from a technical standpoint, it's a huge benefit because we don't have a huge draw on the server as we start to manipulate and go through our product. We're actually trusting and putting a lot of the effort into the client. Now, a lot of resources are being stored in the browser cache, like the fonts that we see here, image previews. A lot of these other elements are all called through the API call or the URL when this page is loaded. But otherwise, it's all that's going on. Now, when this file is done, we would then make a call to save this document back to the server. So it would take the XML, which is the template that we're working on here, save it over a file on my system, and then overwrite that file so that we have a new copy on the system when it's done. Now that general flow, that general concept is really how we build a Chili editor into really any workflow that we could possibly think of. This iframe can be hosted on a general page. We're going to show you a few customer examples of how that's put together here a little bit later. I'll bring in some implementations that you'll see and kind of understand. But the concept is wherever this iframe can go, you can make the iframe a lot smaller. You can surround it with your HTML elements. You could pretty much customize it any way that you want, but the concept is still there. It's showing this editor within your site and your pages. Now back to the PowerPoint. API integration points, starting to understand where those general points go. Now, big point is the client is going to make a combination. When we're talking about the spicy beer company, the client made a request to the spicy beer company. And that's what pulled up our page and pulled up our site. Now, the spicy beer company asked the server for a particular template. It asked it for the particular template that we're seeing up on the page. And now the spicy beer company is delivering the product array that you see here. Clients then relating back to the server, showing the product and getting the thumbnails of the product that you see on the page. So between these elements, between the server and the client is making the request depending on what we would like to see. Now again, when that product page got asked, that's when the server spoke to the spicy beer company portal and delivered the URL to the client that we're looking to load for the particular piece that we're editing. And then the client spoke to the server, generated the editor through the editor of JavaScript, and then now asked for the document XML and delivered it on the page. So these three elements speak into each other. The Chili publisher server, the client side, which is making the request, and the spicy beer company, which is the portal that you're driving through. Working with those elements in between the editor.js and the document XML, which is the piece that we're working on. Now, of course, as that document is done, after we make the changes, we want to save it, then the client is passing back that edited, modified document XML back to the server to save that document for that new project. Now, a few different ways that we integrate, a few of these integration points as we start to build on each other. There's server-side integration. There's your website asking your server to do particular actions. And those actions might be adding new assets, might be creating a new document, might be copying or moving a document. So when we opened up that business card, it would be making a copy of the template that I was working on and then storing it for that new project. And it might even be creating a data source or some kind of source of different copy that we're going to be populating into our template. Now, other types of integration that we have would be client-side integration. So when I'm working on that template live on the screen, that client-side integration might be manipulating the editor in real time, might be asking the editor to do something as it's open. So now we're not talking about server-based actions. We're talking about actually as we're editing a template in real time. And that might be changing a page, forcing a save, adding an element to the live editor, adding a page, and so on. So there's things that we can do that are not only user-based by clicking in the editor, but we can actually have our website force the editor to do particular things if we wish. And then the third way is actually external data. We can actually take data feeds from our system, and those data feeds would either be assets like images or snippets or other aspects that we'd like to populate into the template, or even data. And that data might be a user profile's data to update variables, or it might be a set of data or a complete data set that might be outputs that we're producing. So if I'm producing 50, 100 PDFs based on a whole list of records, I could actually feed that data into my template in order to do data merge or multiple PDF output. Now, of these integration points, server-side integration, that's done via web service calls and SOAP. It's not a RESTful API, it's a SOAP API, and we can deliver those messages to our server-side integration. Client-side integration, that's going to be done via JavaScript. And so if we have an active editor open, that editor.js element, we can now drive JavaScript calls to the editor to force it to do particular things. External data, that's going to be via XML feeds. It's going to be populating and reorganizing and reasserting our XML from our system, driving it to our editor, and updating that information. The other aspect of external data, we actually work with dynamic asset providers, where you can feed your asset provider particular information and then call an asset back to the system. Dynamic asset providers, very easy example of this is like a photo service, where if I pass a parameter to a photo service, that photo service would deliver back to me a JPEG. And that might be like a Fotolia or might be a direct smile, where you're giving it parameters like size or image name or something, and then that service would deliver back an image. So Chili has the ability to speak to those kind of systems in order to make your templates even more diverse. Now, if we look at that SOAP organization on how that whole system works. So we look at that beer company example that we just looked at. That's your web server, your web to print portal. Well, you're making SOAP calls between your web to print portal and your web services on your Chili web server. And those web services would be adding a document, making a copy, etc. Now, when the web service call gets made, SOAP call can be made to the back office, our organization platform, where those copies would be made, new template would be generated, or new information would be organized. Now, if the web service call is creating a PDF or asking for a preview of an image, well, then we're asking the Chili engine to do so. We're going to organize it that way. Now, at this point, let me take you out and show you a little bit about what the back office looks like in order to give you a little bit more context. The back office is your direct platform and access point to your Chili server. Now, this is going to be where you organize your templates, where you modify your information. Now, this is big to understand if you're organizing Chili into a DAM service. Some of the elements are and can be stored on your Chili server as opposed to your own file server. So here, this is your kind of window into your Chili environment. Now, Chili doesn't have a backup of a database. It actually just has a file structure that's associated with your application on your server. That file structure is what you see here, your document list, your font list, your workspaces, your view preferences, etc. These are all resources that exist on your system. So again, we'll go back to the PowerPoint and see my Chili web service is making a call to my back office, and that's where we make a copy of that template and so on. Now, let's take a look a little bit at our documentation here in order to see, by the way, as we work with our API, we have a very, very comprehensive documentation set to help you step through. So if you're interested in Chili and you're telling yourself, well, I'd love to try to work on maybe doing an implementation and working on a proof of concept to see how these pieces will come together, we give you access to this documentation and you can get all the information about the editor. And some of that information is a look at our back office and all the different pieces that it can do, a guide to the editor itself. So if you want a quick reference guide to how to use that editor, documentation is there. And then, of course, our API documentation, which is actually a main portion of this 1,500 pages of our documentation. And we're going to go now and look at our web service functions to start to understand what we can do with the server. And I think we take a lot of pride in the number of web services and the number of functions that we can create. And as we go through these one by one, we can start to format and ask our editor to pretty much do anything we want from your system. And a good example here might be something like creating a copy. Let's look at finding a copy of a resource right there. Resource item copy. Copies a resource item, returns the definition XML of the new item. So in this case, we could ask our system if it has a template inside a folder to make a copy of that template. When I make a copy, I can give it a new name, can pass information. And let's take a look at the web service itself. We can see that we can give an item ID, which is a definition of an item on our server. I can give a new name and a new path. And we can see that by generating an API key on my system, I can start to do a lot of these functions. Now, the next point of integration would be via JavaScript. So be working with an active editor. So it'd be once I've opened up an editor on the screen, start to develop it. Now, a lot of those things can be retrieving information from an open document. It's an easy thing to do. Something like asking it for the number of pages, asking it for the colors that are configured, and maybe even the variables defined. And the reason that we would do something like that is to collect that information and maybe present that information back to my user as part of your interface. Now, Chili, from what we see on screen here from the Spicy Beer Company, it comes with its own interface. This is off the shelf, very straightforward, customizable, but not as customizable as maybe an HTML developer or a UI developer would really be used to. They're used to being able to structure a whole HTML page and surround an editor. Well, in that case, we can start to take some of these functions of JavaScript implementation and really start to open this up to be able to build your own implementation. If you wanted to grab, information about your document, present it back to the user, you could do so in real time by making a query to the editor, taking that information, and then displaying it outside of the iframe on the page. Some of the other things we can do, we can trigger actions. We can ask the editor to force a save. We can open up another document. If we wanted to change from piece to piece, we definitely could. Other things we can do is we can change the cursor. So if we wanted to go from a text tool to a pointer tool in order to give the user different functionality, we could force the editor to do so. I can also look at what the editor is doing and handle events as it goes. So I can put in flags to say, when the document is fully loaded, or provide certain notifications to the user. Now, Chili itself has a notification system, but you can build your own. You can really start to make it look and feel just like you want it to. I can do certain things for the user. So maybe when a variable value is changed, maybe when I change a first name, I could give back a notification to the user, or maybe look at the value and do some validation. Do a lot of things on my own in order to control that. Now, I can also manipulate the open editor. So if I wanted to build my own controls for adding text frames and images, etc., I could do so and really build that custom integration. And at this point, let's take a look at a client example that we have out in the world in order to see maybe a really good example of how this is done. We'll client My Creative Shop. They are a public-facing customer. They do business to consumer editing. So their model is pay a monthly service. That monthly service gives their users access to over 10,000 templates. And those templates include door hangers, pocket folders, gift certificates, envelopes, anything you could possibly think of. So they've done all the template work in advance. They're just giving access where this might be brought to somebody by a design service or a design firm. They'd like to give that end user their own access to the system. And now I could go in here as part of my subscription, find my letterhead that I'd like to work on, and really start to manage that product. Now, once I find this product and I go, all right, apartment living or family photography, whatever kind of part that I'd like to push it to, we're going to then launch the editor. This is the part of the process where we looked at earlier where this is not Chili, but Chili's behind this whole process to where now that we're moving into the editing stage, this is where we're making a call to Chili and we're driving in. Now let's compare the page that we see here with the page that we saw before. Let's see My Creative Shop compared to the Spicy Beer Company. This is an off-the-shelf interface. This whole area from this back button below that green bar all the way down to the bottom right of the page, that's my iframe. That's where my editor is sitting. My creative shop has their iframe from right below the trash button and the undo and the copy paste down to the bottom right, that white canvas. But everything surrounding it, that's their HTML interface. They've built Chili into this framework that they've really customized. And they've chose to take on, the actions and the elements of Chili in their own system. Now I can still click into the editor. I can still make changes to the item. So if I wanted to update my copy and I wanted to change information like update a font and pass information, I could. And I can modify that font by changing a color. I can change it here too and pass that information over. So I have the ability to customize my editor as I go. But if I want to make any changes, I'm doing this not inside the editor. I'm actually passing the call from this HTML interface. So right here I have like to add a text frame, and when I do, it's injecting that into the template, but then I can move it and pass it anywhere that I want. Now they've done some other things here too. They've worked with photo services and different integrations and passing data to their own website. So for example, when I look at images and I want to go on a stock photo and I want to look for flowers, I find an image here like this. I can take this image, inject it into the editor, but all this information here on the left, that's being done on their website. They've built all this into their own custom interface. They're collecting that information, and then they're not even touching the editor yet until a user is ready to plug that image into the editor. And when I make the call, they take that asset, pass it to the editor, and now they have it ready to work with. Now I can move this element around, resize it if I wanted to, and go. But to make that point again, they don't touch the editor until this final call is made. And then from a JavaScript standpoint, they've made a call to generate a new image frame, take the value that they've collected here for what image is being seen at what crop, and pass that value here inside the frame by a preview image. So doing all that. Now, any changes that we make to the frame as it's highlighted, like adding a border color or adding an effect like a drop shadow or another image effect that might be processed, well, they're doing all that outside of the editor, but they're passing the final product to the user here. And we'll see that function in action. All right, so a great way to do this. Now, let's take a look at another example of this and another great integration, another kind of good example of another integration. We have a company, Tadaz. They're, I believe, a Belgian-based company, but they do invitations in much the same way. So they are allowing a user to find an invitation that they'd like to build for themselves. They click on that invitation. All these thumbnails are produced on their own by their system. But when a user finds an invitation that they'd like to edit, make a click on that invitation, that's when they make a call, actually after they add it to the cart. That's when they make a call to the Chili server. They're asking the Chili server for this particular file. They're asking for it as a URL as part of the API, and then they're going to deliver that URL to the user in order for them to edit. Now on the page here, this page, very similar to our original page, but they've chosen to use some of their own editor elements as well. They have an add to cart button, a save button. They have some extra navigation down at the bottom of the screen for changing out documents. They've built their own zoom tools and rotation tools into the editor. But all that said, they've chosen to build their own navigation. And now they have the editor here on a very clean screen. If I'd like to go in here and build this for myself and update my copy in real time. So another great integration, another way to take that integration, especially with their JavaScript bridge here, in order to create a nice seamless work experience for their end user. All right, so let's go back to the editor. Now we'll see we have a great point of documentation actually on our site about that JavaScript implementation. And part of our documentation is really showing you how that implementation is done, and even kind of debunking and giving you a lot of the code that you'll need to use. So at any point as part of the editor, you can get the editor object. You can ask the editor for an element by tag name, looking for the iframe, or you can ask for a particular element inside the iframe. I can register to an event, and you can see the different events that we have, and we have the code in order to do so, in order to create that. And then we have an object instance, so we can actually look inside of our table or inside of our editor and look for certain information. Other calls that we can do with JavaScript are actually getting property values. So we can actually look at a particular element like a selected frame in the editor. We can ask for the border width or even set that border width by giving it a new property value. And you can see the whole call here, the set property call. And then we can call certain functions. We've actually built particular functions into the JavaScript interface in order to do things like adding a new frame. We can see that call, the execute function. We can see the different calls that are made. Now, all of this is backed up by our document object model that we can see here in our documentation too, where we can take a look based on the elements that are in the editor, what elements can be called. And we can see here a very comprehensive document object model about the way that we build our templates to be able to see things like the document and the different attributes of the document that we can pull at any time. We can ask for the pages, we can ask for colors, we can ask for any information, and especially at the document level, we also have a list of functions that can be done, like save and revert, place content, set cursor, etc. So all these functions are publicly facing. You make those function calls based on your application when you pass through the call through JavaScript. By the way, if there's any questions, please feel free to stop me at any time as we're going along. If this is very basic integration, definitely trying to touch as much as I can. But if you have any particular advanced questions, please do let me know, and we'll see if we can help you out. The final piece would be integrating external data. And you've seen a little bit of this with the My Creative Shop example, where we're injecting external data into the editor. It's really using outside of the box panels, the ability to take assets and inject those into the system. And we do that by passing XML information into the editor. Now, part of this involves the ability to actually do asset lists and even data inside a template itself. So let's take a look at an example of that we have on the Spicy Beer Company. I'm going to show you an example of injecting a data list into a template. We have a part of our editor that allows you to visualize a data set. Now, this data set can be reformatted as part of your implementation and visualized in a different way. But in this template, I can store multiple records. And I can do this, especially with that data ingested. I can then visualize each of the records in my data set by letting a user choose between those records. And it would update variable values and pass that information to the editor. And then I have the ability here to take that data set and then create multiple PDFs. So I could do a PDF per record. Question for the crowd, is there any ability to reorder through Chili? Chris asked, is there an example of like to reorder a business card with updated details? Chris has a great question. That's actually going to be a function of your e-commerce system. So if you look at the way that Chili works with an e-commerce platform and when an order is placed, that order is really registered through the e-commerce platform itself. So it's really going to be a function of creating an order, putting it in your shopping cart, etc. Now, if you store the template after it's built, so user A would work on this business card and then buy this business card through their shopping cart, you would probably then allocate this order to that user. You'd probably maybe store the name of the document or the item ID of this particular template so that when the user comes back and they'd like to order it again, they could always recall their document. Now, in the same way that you called their document to start, you made an API call to the server, you asked for a URL, and then you showed on that particular document, you would just use that old product ID, the one that they ordered before. Then you'd allow them to either open it, make a new template from there, and so on. So the answer is yes, you can definitely build a workflow where a user would be able to reorder. The long answer is that's mostly a function of your production tool or your e-commerce tool. So working with something like Magento or PageFlex in order to create that flow. But a very good question, and really depending on which platform you're using. So now in this particular template, I can pass this information via XML at any time. So as long as I organize that XML and pass it back to the editor, I can definitely see that in real time. And there's a few ways in order to see that information. And let's take a look at the way that our information is organized on our system. And we'll take a look at our data source, XML. Look at our external data source XML in order to take a look at this. So we have a concept inside the editor that allows me to populate a template with external XML. We can see the way that the XML looks here. I can actually provide a query string that would allow me to filter my products as I make that call back from my system. And then I can also pull this data XML to my user. We can see that it's very clear. It's by row, field name with the value, and then we pass it over. Now, this data can be updated inside a URL. So what we can do is we can actually publish this data to a particular URL, and when the editor opens, it would look at that URL and then populate that information over. So a few different ways in order to populate it. We ask for three concepts. We ask for the main URL. We can even pass a PDF URL. So if there's a place where you're storing final assets, so maybe my data set includes a collection of images or a collection of logos that I'd like to pass over, well, you can optionally provide a URL where the data in the document is downloaded again from the location right before creating a PDF. So I could actually pass a preview image as part of my original data set to show inside the editor, but then I could pass a PDF URL for those final high-res assets. So we can save a little time when we're making a call maybe from my external assets that which asset is being passed over. And then finally a query URL. So if I did want to do some objects, I could. Now, as part of the query URL, we actually add the parameter query into the editor URL when we load it. So I can pull values from your system. I can actually manipulate or replace values inside the editor URL when I make the call in order to update values in my editor. So definitely ways to do so if you're creating kind of a diverse data set. All right, so that is a way in order to influence and pass information. Now, if we're working with images and not data, the other way to reference this would be to provide an image set to my user. So if I open up a template that might have a list of images, we can see kind of how this comes together. Now the panels inside our editor are really drawn by data and information that you pass. So in this particular template, I have a list of images that can be dragged and dropped into the template that we see here on the screen. Now, as a user flips through these images and finds the image they'd like to use, they can then drag and drop that into the editor to update their value. Now, this list of images right now, as we're building it in the proof of concept, this is actually just a folder on my asset system. So what I've done is I've built a folder in my assets here. I've linked that folder to this particular template, and I've opened up that information. Now, that's the easiest implementation. We would hard code the name of a folder into a template. The advanced implementations are I can actually use API manipulation in order to update the values of the folders that we see inside the template. So when I load this editor, I can actually change which folders are shown here, maybe based on a user level, based on a document level, or even a user group level. And then what I can do is this folder is then populated for a particular user if they would like a particular set of images that have been approved for them. Or at the document level, we have images that are only available to postcards as opposed to cell sheets or different pieces. So these folders and these images can definitely be catered. And then the third way is that you can actually construct the feed here and what we're seeing here and pass that information to the user as part of an external assets feed. Let's take a look at what that page looks like here. We can pass information to the user. The concept is allow panels inside the editor for a user to drag and drop images from external systems into a document. So we would create that URL, and we can see that URL here. We pass a few pieces of information to it, a directory list of images to be shown, a list of assets that somebody's going to be using. We can influence a search. So if I give search values to pass, I can. And then I even have a post URL. If I'd like to allow users to post information back to your server, you could allow a URL to collect that information and then pass back. Now, once we create that asset list, we can see the different XML definitions down here. You can see what our directory XML looks like. We can see what our asset XML looks like. We can see all the different parameters that are included in that asset XML. We have information like ID, so the unique name. We have the remote URL where it's located, maybe a thumb URL of that particular image, target path, and etc. And so you can see kind of how that information is collected. Now, when this image gets accessed by the server, for example, if I were to use a particular remote asset like this asset inside my system, Chili has to create the preview that we see on the screen. So that asset, even though it's in your remote location, would still be downloaded to the local Chili server in order to create the preview here, unless you provide us with a preview image to be used on screen in the form of a PDF. So you can create your own previews in advance in order to keep the separation off the Chili server. I noticed I had a follow-up question from Chris. I want to make sure that I got it. Great. So to follow up that question earlier, Chris, e-commerce solution or provider has not figured that out yet. Wanted to confirm with you that it happened. Definitely feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you have particular questions about your e-commerce solution. We'd talk a way through. There are a few e-commerce solutions out there in the world that we have plugins for. Like, for example, we have a plugin for XMPie. We have one for Magento. We have one for PageFlex and one for WooCommerce. So that would be an implementation that we have already built a structure inside of in order to use Chili. And so if you're interested more in those, and that would save you a lot of development time and a lot of implementation time, we could show you how that's put together and how you would access that. All right, so that is kind of working with external data inside the editor. And our documentation are the two things that I just showed you, our external XML resources and our URL information. So let's talk about as you're starting a project for yourself and maybe the questions that you would ask yourself. And we really think that before you start your integration project, there are a lot of analysis kind of questions or points that you should make in order to better understand what process and what direction you're going to be taking. The ideas might be like, what functionalities do you need? As you're building your website, really what points do you need to happen? When somebody accesses a template, what do they need to edit? Do they need to add information? Do they need to be able to inject information? Exactly what do they need to be able to do? And once you create that wish list, it's really just then finding the features in Chili that can do the things that you need. How do you want to organize your documents? Is there a structure and an organization that you'd like to create? I know that if I'm creating an e-commerce solution, I might consider a little bit of a different structure than if I'm building a DAM solution or a workflow solution. For example, e-commerce has a kind of a unique feature. A lot of times with e-commerce, I might start an order that I don't finish. I might open up a business card, start to create it, but I never order it and pass it to my cart. So we might create a little bit of a different organization of a product system like that, where I create a template in maybe a temp folder. And then I don't actually save that project until a user adds it to cart or maybe even runs it through the ordering process. So in that case, I might have some temp files or some loose files that I don't try to catalog in order to save myself some space over time. What type of documents will be edited? Large documents, small documents. We've worked with yearbook providers in the past. And if I want to build a yearbook, I have to really understand how that yearbook is going to be edited. It's a lot different to build a yearbook than it is a business card. Do I like to open up a 100-page document inside a web browser and allow somebody to edit page by page? No. Might think a little bit differently about the way that a user is going to edit. So we've seen yearbook implementations where they give users kind of 2 pages at a time, and they create spread by spread instead of building their whole document all at once. And that allows them a quicker load because we're opening smaller documents, just 2 pages at a time. It might ask for collaboration. If I'm allowing one person to create 2 pages, maybe another person can create 2 pages at the same time, and we're using the system even better. How many documents do you expect to have on your system? Is there a great way to organize it? Now, as you're looking at your whole server, you might be thinking, well, I have 50 customers that I'd like to create templates for. Chili has the ability to segment out your server using something called environments. This allows you to create a unique environment per customer. Now, this will help with your API call times because we're not looking through a million templates at once. We might be looking through 100 or 200 for a particular customer. And those environments are thought differently when making API calls. So, and you can also create different settings per environment. So if I wanted to do certain access rights or certain calls to the API in one environment, I could do different ones for another. How many users will be working on your documents? What kind of load is going to be pushing through your system? Are they going to be working on it at the same time? Are they going to be accessing templates differently? Now, a lot of that comes from the governance that you're going to have inside your application. What templates are they exposed to? How are they going to see it? But in the end, it's also going to reflect on the editor and utilizing the API in order to give custom asset folders or different interfaces depending on the user and so on. Do you want to automate your documents? Just because we have an editor doesn't mean a lot of the pieces that we create will always be editable. Maybe the easier way to do would be to take information from the user, populate it into a template utilizing the API, and then generate the PDF of that product without ever opening an editor itself. We can definitely do that, and Chili can be done, and it can be used in very much a server-based product where we're passing information, making a callback, generating a file, and then going. Another use for this might be kitting, where if I have a user who's giving me information, I could then generate 5, 10 different templates all at once for a particular user. So that can be done with Chili utilizing the API. Will you reuse images in multiple documents? If I have a user-based folder, how do I show that same folder to different users in different times? And that can be done with the implementation that we showed earlier. When can a document be cleaned up? If a user is working on it, do I then pass it to a designer after they're done? Do I clean up a document up front to make it as agile as possible? How do I really make this art processable so that when it's done, it goes right into print? Do I pass it to a workflow tool like Switch or PDF Toolbox or something to examine my PDF afterwards? What am I moving it through? How am I seeing the bigger picture? And then do I need some sort of archiving? How long do orders need to be saved? If I'm planning on running my e-commerce solution for 10 years, how long do I keep a file on my system before I pass it away? Again, all these questions have variable answers depending on your application. You know more of it, way more than we do. And really, for the most part, this is more of a structure question. Chili can do any configuration because it's a very flexible product. It's really just identifying the structure that you need for your particular application. Now, on the development side, we ask or we suggest work with milestones, phases, releases. My Creative Shop definitely didn't roll out to the product that you see in one big step. We see a very basic integration as you come out to pull an editor and use our internal interface. Getting an iframe up on a site is much quicker than developing out a full-fledged JavaScript interface. So there are stages and different kind of releases that we would suggest that you do. And building out a proof of concept, you don't necessarily have to reach to the stars in order to see what that application is going to be. But once you create your solid foundation, once you understand your file structure, how to organize your templates and so on, from a Chili side, makes everything else easier. And as you create your piece, you're definitely ahead of the game and you can start scaling that out very easily. We think don't wait with your maintenance scripts until the last development phase. Definitely process those as you go. And designers and developers should work very closely together, especially as you're building out these templates, understanding from a development standpoint what's needed from the templates and so on. There's so many things you can do with standardization, naming files certain ways, naming layers certain ways, naming frames in your template certain ways in order to help with your development down the road. A big thing, a very simple thing, is creating layer structure. If I'd like to create a layer called background and a layer called artwork, that background can be locked up by the end user, by the API, can always be scaled. So by creating naming conventions past your designers, you can build these things very quick. And especially as a designer takes on a new project, there's nothing like getting a template built, having it drop on the developer's lap and be like, build this into my site that has a bunch of features that you guys aren't familiar with. So it's really working together to make sure that both the implementation and the template build at the same time. So a few examples, and we kind of running out of time here, but a few pieces that we see that are out there, the JavaScript customized interface that we shown you earlier, using SOAP to automate. The ability with that automation that we talked about, using the API in order to pre-populate templates with information. JavaScript and external feeds to create external images. So the example that you saw with My Creative Shop as well. And then external feeds to show a product catalog. So another example in that tadas might be utilizing external feeds to show multiple records on an editing experience. So if I have 2 or 3 different pieces within the set, if I have a card and an envelope and a letterhead and so on, I can use an external feed here to populate this with different records or other products that I'm ordering outside of Chili. I don't need to show templates here. I could order flowers or other things inside of the two. So it's really creating that kind of multi-tiered implementation in order to create your site. But in the end, it's just about understanding your product. It's just about understanding what you're trying to put together, especially we know not all products are created equal. And for that, we like to make ourselves available if there are any questions. We have a Facebook page and website where we have a lot of our information about our trainers, our R&D team, and some client examples that we put together out there in the world. You can always mail us if you have particular questions. We'd love to do a one-on-one session with you as you go. We'd love to be involved early in the process. We hate for you to get too far down the road, especially when you're working with a product like ours. So we like to make ourselves available to help with that process. I'll take this information here and post it in the chat if anybody needs it after the presentation. And finally, our documentation is diverse. You can go through a lot of pieces that you'll need. So if you're interested, definitely request access to that documentation. We can not only do that, but we can also develop a POC site for you or a development environment for you. So without ever purchasing Chili or before you purchase Chili, you definitely get access to a development space. And as part of that development space, we actually even give you an API sample. And I'll show you that here in a second before we log out. We've actually taken a lot of our findings and a lot of the things that we put together. We've tried to put it in a way where you would have access to it in order to see and reuse. And so as part of even your implementation or as part of your API, part of your POC process, you could actually access our API sample in order to see more information. So we've taken a sample Chili server, we've put it into kind of a general framework, and I'll log into my environment here to show you. And then through that general framework, you can see all of our API calls in action. Let's see if I got the password right the first try. I did. All the steps that you see here, these are all functions of the API. Like for example, getting resource information, looking at a particular template and understanding it. Now, as I go through these calls, these buttons, these are all different API functions. So getting a tree, resource tree, grabbing a particular document, accessing its information, checking it out, looking at a thumbnail, and grabbing a preview. Now, every step that we do here, we not only build for you, but we also give you the source code, and we show you how to do so. You can definitely steal our source code and reuse it in your site. So that's part of the product suite that we provide to you in developing out your proof of concept. Now, we also do technical training, so JavaScript and external data training, server architecture maintenance, and we can even cater our training to your particular applications. We can make it your own, make sure that we're not just reading off PowerPoint to you like I've been doing for the last hour, but definitely talk about your particular pieces. And we have developers not only work on the product, but have done implementations like your own in the past who can work with you. And with that, guys, we have about 5 minutes left before the end of the hour. Would love to take any questions that you might have. If you'd like to talk personally about your application, feel like you want to ask particular questions, I'm going to post my email inside the chat. And you can definitely reach out to me in order to set up a one-on-one session for a later date. But otherwise, if you do not, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you guys joining, checking out our site and our information. If you do have some additional questions you'd like to ask over time, again, reach out to us on your own and let me know. But appreciate you taking an hour of your time out of your day, and thanks for being a great audience.